Hello, my name is Carl Surrey and this is a video tutorial for two Facebook groups, first being fans of serif software and the other one being Affinity designer and photo group. Now this is going to be an adaptation of this Photoshop tutorial which has this face peel effect. So it just looks like you'd peeled an apple, for example, in one go, but you do it with the image of this, in this case of this lady here. You can, from this tutorial, if I click on the show more here, down the bottom here, there's a link to that particular image if you want to use that, or you can use your own. And this tutorial is done by Photoshop Tutorials Photo Effects. I would add a link to this tutorial in the description for my tutorial, and like I said, you can get the link for the image. And this was my first attempt at doing this using that particular image. I then got an image from Pixabay.com and I tried it, and this is my second attempt, and I'm going to retry it in this video using this image. So I'm going to also add a link in the description so you can get this image as well. So you've got a choice of two images that you can use, or like I said, you can use your own. And lastly, just as a trial, I tried it on an image of an apple. I had to change the settings for the background strips to give it like the look of the inside of the apple, but it didn't come out too bad. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the start image. Like I said, I got this image from Pixabay.com, and the first thing I'm going to do, we need to select the face area. So I'm going to come to the selection brush tool, or you can press W on the keyboard, and I'm going to have the mode set to add, and I've got snap to edges set, and you can either just click sort of randomly like that, or just click and hold down the button and select large areas. Now I'm going to come sort of roughly to the edges of the hair, but I'm not worried about the stray hairs outside that much, because they're not really necessary for this process. So I'm just doing a rough selection. Pretty much that's about it, I think. What is more important is not to miss any of the areas on the inside, because sometimes you can just miss a very little bit and you just don't notice. But I think I've got everything now. Yes, I think that will do. So what I'm just going to do now is I'm just going to refine that slightly. So I'm going to click on the refine button, and I'm just going to feather that by 3 pixels roughly, and then click apply. So that will just make that selection slightly softer, and then I'm going to click on mask layer and add a layer mask, and this icon looks a bit like the Japanese flag, so you just click on that, and then that will remove the background there. And then I'm going to come up to document, and the very last option is flatten, and then I can press Ctrl and D to lose the selection area. So if I come to the move tool, I can now move that wherever I want. I'll just roughly central it for now. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to resize the canvas slightly. Depending on your picture, you may not need to do this. in the original Photoshop tutorial he sort of widened it without altering the height, but I'm going to add a little bit to the height and the width. So I'm going to come up to Document, down to Resize Canvas. I'm going to put the anchor point in the middle, and then I'm just going to alter. I'm going to click on this padlock so I can alter the numbers, and altering one won't affect the other. So I'm going to make the width 2500, and I'm going to make the height 3000 pixels, and then just click resize, and then again I'm not going to put it dead center. I'm going to have it slightly lower this way because I'm going to be adding a bit of a strip coming out the top of her head, so I just need a slightly more room at the top, but not by much. So now I've got my new canvas size, and I have the face pixel layer. What I need to do now is to add a new pixel layer, which is this icon between the group layers and the remove layers. So I'll just click on that, and it will add this blank pixel layer at the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag it down to the bottom. Now it is still highlighted, so what I'm going to do is to fill this with colour, and what I want is a dark grey. Now to get a dark grey, if I click somewhere down here in the black area, what you need for a grey is pretty much all the numbers being the same. So you could have like 30, 30, 30 or whatever. It's easier, I find it easier to type these in, so I'm going to go with 40, 40, 40, and then I'm going to come to the flood fill tool, and it will use the colour that is set as a foreground colour. So we have this grey colour. You can use whichever shade of grey you want. Now this next part here does sort of prove that you don't necessarily need to do what I've just done to preset the background, but I just want to demonstrate where Photoshop and Affinity Photo sort of differ, because we're going to be adding sort of like an FX gradient onto this. Now in the Photoshop tutorial, the gradient will automatically take whatever the two colours, foreground and background colours, are set at to make the gradient, but Affinity Photo always seems to make it in black and white regardless. So I just wanted to demonstrate that happening. So I'm going to have to reset this back to the 40, 40, 40 that I want. So whichever colour grey that you go for, I would sort of remember what it is, so you can reset this. So with this pixel layer highlighted, I'm going to click on Effects, and then put a tick into Gradient Overlay, and then click on the word Gradient Overlay to get the options for the gradient. So as you can see, that's converted to black and white regardless of the fact that the foreground colours are different. So what I will need to do is to click in this gradient area here and click on the, well, it is currently set because it is, this node is bigger than the white node at that end, and the colour is black. So if I click in this area, I can make all these 40, 40. And then just click outside that area to close that down, so you can now see that that is now grey going to white. Now I'm going to change the blending mode to soft light. I'm going to change the type to radial, and I'm going to click back into this area here, and I'm going to click on reverse, like that, and I'm going to increase the scale X slider up to roughly about 200%. That's close enough. And then I'm going to lower the overall opacity down to 50% roughly. There we go. And I'm going to leave the angle on 0. So I'll close that, so now it looks like there's a sort of light coming from behind the head there. Now in this next bit again is something you don't necessarily have to do, but it was part of the Photoshop tutorial. What the person did was he highlighted the face pixel layer and he duplicated it, so I can right click and come to duplicate, and he clicked and dragged that layer to the very bottom, and he said that this was like a safety net, a precaution, so if anything went wrong he could always come back and use this reserve layer, or if once he's done it once and he wanted to do it a slightly different way, he could hide the layers that he makes above and just drag this above the background layer and start again. But like I said, you don't have to do that. I'm just sort of adapting the tutorial the best way I can. So I will click and highlight the top face layer, and what we now need to do is to make selections sort of strips across the face. Let me just come off this tool, and what I'm going to use is the freehand selection tool, which is in the menu, which probably by default you have as rectangular marquee tool. So just click on that little downward arrow there, come down to the freehand selection tool, and I'm going to do this freehand, so it's the first icon, and I'm going to select add and put a tick into anti-alias, because that will reduce the sort of jaggedness of the edges. It won't necessarily take it all away, but it will make it a lot less jagged. Now the idea here is to draw fairly similar size strips across the face, maybe 5 or 6 depending on the size of your image, and you want to sort of capture the main features, you know, like the lips, the nose, the eyes, whether you do them one eye per strip or both eyes in the same strip, and a bit of a forehead, so you know that even though they're separated, you do know that it is a face. So I'm going to just catch a bit of a chin here. That's probably not too good. Let me go back and try that again. What's the trouble with doing this freehand? It's a little bit imprecise. Right, now to try and get her lips. The only trouble with sort of facial features, obviously, because they're not too far apart, so there's not much gap between, say, the lips and the nose and the eyes. Right, that's the nose. Now to capture the eyes. and then a bit at the forehead, and then I'll just do one more. Right, so we have the 6 strips I've made there. So what I want to do now is come up to the select menu and down to invert pixel selection. So now it is like the outside area that is being selected rather than the inside area. And the next thing we want to do is to delete. Now I've yet to find a delete option within the menu system. If it's there, I can't see it for looking. So what I have to do is just press delete on the keyboard. So some keyboards I think it's written as DEL, but others it's written as delete, so just click on that, and then that will remove the bits in between the areas you've selected. So I can now press Control and D to remove that selection area. So the next step I want to do is to make yet another pixel layer, and what I'm going to do is to make the selections for the strips that I'm going to end up going behind this image. So I'm still going to use the freehand selection tool. I'm just going to zoom in to make this slightly easier to do, and I'm going to have a strip coming out of the top of the head, which is why I left a slightly more room at the top. Though we've got to remember, like if you're peeling this, I'm going to have the strip coming around this way, and then it's going to go sort of like that, zigzagging. So I'm going to start from inside the hair area here, and then I'm going to come up to the corner, come out, and then back and join, and then I will carry on doing the rest. And I'm trying to roughly keep this similar size to the strips that I've made, so it looks like it's a continuation. So now I've done that first one, I'm going to come from this corner down to this corner, but I'm going to again start from inside the hair area, come to the corner of the hair, and then come up and round to the corner of this side, and roughly like that. So again I'm going to come from this right hand corner, I didn't like that one, let's try that again. If you press Ctrl and Z if you don't like one, and try it again. There we go. Nearly there. I mean, I'm probably going a little bit too quick. You can take your time. Alright, now there I'll press Ctrl and Z just to zoom out again. So I now have these selected. Now what I need is a colour to fill this. Now what I'm going to do, this eyedropper icon up here, I'm going to hold down the Control key and keep it held down, and then left click and hold the eyedropper icon and drag it out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample a dark area on this lady's skin. Let's try about there. And that little circle next to the eyedropper is the colour that I sampled. So if I click on that, it will make that colour the foreground colour. So if I come to the flood fill tool and click into one of these selected areas, that will fill all of those with that colour. So I can now press Ctrl and D to deselect those. And what I'm going to do now is click and drag this layer in between the face layer below it and the background layer. Now as you click and drag this down, a blue line will appear at various points. If that blue line only comes to the beginning of the icon, from the right hand edge to the beginning of the icon here, that is making that layer a child of the layer that is above it. But if the blue line comes all the way across, that means it is a layer in its own right. And that is what we are trying to do here. We're trying to make this a layer in its own right. So click and drag this down, because at the moment that would make that a child of the pixel layer above it, which I don't want. If I come down slightly more, as soon as that blue line goes all the way across, that will now slot in between those two layers. So that now looks like that is behind the pixel layer, face strip pixel layer, which is the effect that we are after. Right, now what we can do now is, if you come to the Meshwalk tool, which is in the same menu as the perspective tool, when you click on that, it will put a white bounding box around this. And let me zoom in slightly. And if you put the cursor along the line, I don't know whether you can see this, but just under the cursor appears a little, looks like a little double-headed arrow, which means that once that appears, you can click and start to warp the image. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and drag this top line down slightly to sort of just bow these background strips slightly. And you do have to be careful, keep an eye on, make sure that no areas are starting to wander or too far away from where you want them. So let me just try that again. Alright, that's not too bad. Oh, that one there is slightly moved. That's it, it's back in the corner. It's only a minor effect, it's just sort of widening the gap slightly between some of these areas. You may be able to do that with the liquify tool persona, but I'm not very good with that persona, so I'm using the Meshwalk tool. And once you're happy, just click apply, and that effect will be added to that layer. Now, next thing I want to do is to add a new add an effects layer to this background strip. So not an effects layer, sorry, a layer effect. So I'm going to again click on the FX button, and again I'm going to be adding a gradient overlay, and again it will automatically make it black and white, but I do have a slight workaround for this. But first I do want to say that in the Photoshop tutorial, if you watch it, he adds, I think he called it a reflective gradient, which is not an option within Affinity Photo, so I'm going to have to sort of make my own. So I'm going to put a tick into gradient overlay. So as you can see, it's made it black and white. Click on the word gradient overlay to get the options, and then I'm going to click in the color box here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make both nodes the color that I selected for these background strips, which is up here in the either of those two buttons there. So what I would do is I will open this color here, and as you can see here we have another eyedropper here. So I will hold down the control key, drag that up, put it over the color I want, release, and then click on that button to make that in the color that I want it to be. And then click on the white node, click on the color, again hold down the control key, sample that color, and make that both ends the same color. So I'm back to the color that I wanted, and then I'm just, at the moment insert is not highlighted, so if I just click roughly in the middle, now insert is an option I can select. So if I click insert, it will add a new node, but it currently has the color that is set between these two, but I now want this to be white. So I'm going to click into here and then just move all these up to 2555, and then these two lines that are the midpoints of these gradient, I'm going to drag them into the center. Right, so as close as you dare to get them. You can click on the node and, well, you should be able to click on a node and move it, but it's not going to let me. So I will close that bit there, and then I'm going to change this to soft light, and the scale X slider, I'm going to reduce this down, and it will make this white line much more defined. Quite how defined you want it, you can set it wherever you feel, but I think around the, I don't know, anywhere from 30 to 20%. Let's go in the middle of there and go with 25, 20. I'll leave it on 27%, and again keeping the angle at 0. Right, now I'm going to add another effect to this, so I'm going to come up and put a tick into inner shadow, and then click on the words inner shadow to get those options, and I'm going to leave the blend mode on multiply for this. I'm going to keep the opacity on 50%, but I'm going to change both the radius to 5 and the offset to 5, and the intensity I'm going to make 32, and hopefully you can see this is just doing a shadow along the top of each of these strips. You can alter the settings if you want it darker or lighter, but I thought it added a nice touch personally, just a slight bit of shadow. So I can now close that effects, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another pixel layer, and that will add it above the background strips and the face strips. But this time I want to make this a child of this background strip, so I'm going to bring it down to the blue line comes only up to the icon. So I'll click and drag this down, and once I've done that, as you can see, that is now a child of that layer. Making sure that this is the layer that is selected, I'm going to come to the paintbrush tool, have black as my foreground color, hardness set on 0, and opacity, it can be 10 to 15%, and then I'm just going to paint. And what I'll do is I'll make the brush slightly bigger. I'm just going to sort of paint around the edges, especially in the corners, just to sort of add a bit of extra shadow effect in the corner areas of where these background strips would be curving round the back. Quite how much or how little you do, I will leave that up to you. Yeah, I think that's, yes, I think that will do for me. So I'll press Ctrl and 0 to zoom back out to where I was. So let me come off that tool a second. So that basically is the end of the tutorial as it was up to in the photo up to this point. So you can save it, export it, or what have you. But I just want to take this slightly further. What I'll do is I will click and highlight both of those layers, and then hold down the Control key and highlight the pixel face strip layer above it, and then I will right click and click on group. I'll then come to the merge tool, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to stretch this out slightly so there's a slightly more gap between the various strips, but still keeping it pretty much in proportion, so you still know it is a face. So if you go too far, you're going to make these sort of jagged edges look even more jagged than they were. So I will stop at that point. I've only moved it slightly. Let me just move in again. So basically that is the end of the tutorial. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.